Before we even start, let's make something clear. Every breed of livestock, no matter what the species, has a place in the market. Even the more difficult animals to raise were bred to thrive in certain environments where the more commonplace ones couldn't live. A cold, hardy breed just won't do as well in the Arizona desert as a breed that was made to live in those conditions. So no, there's no useless breeds out there, but there certainly are quite a number of livestock that are very much overrated, in our opinion at least. Some livestock just don't deserve the popularity they've gained from commercial farming practices. The rules for us guys doing things on a smaller scale aren't the same. So don't be fooled into thinking that because the factory likes a certain pig or chicken, that it'll be suitable for you too. Let's get into some overrated livestock breeds. And like we always do, we'll start with the smallest of the animals, the chickens, and work our way up to the cattle. And don't worry, we won't just be bashing on breeds. We'll add plenty of alternatives for you to choose from too. Chickens Cornish cross and the Leghorns are currently the most commonly farmed chickens in the world, for the simple reason that the Cornish grow out fast and the Leghorns lay a heck of a lot of eggs. But that's where the pros stop, we're afraid to say. Any animal that grows out faster than is usual is always going to come with a ton of health issues before it's 2 years old. Both breeds develop heart, leg, and digestion issues if they're not slaughtered the moment they reach maturity. Neither chicken handles weather fluctuations well, and both are highly susceptible to parasite and bacterial infections. You'll see this theme coming up a lot with the various species we're about to mention. Once a breed is bred to grow out fast enough to keep up with commercial level farming, they just end up losing their original vitality and hardiness. With the fowl species, their temperaments become an enormous issue, and they can no longer be left in mixed gender settings. Males will fight each other constantly, and they'll overbreed the hens to death. Keeping a backyard flock becomes nearly impossible if you want to add a rooster or two to keep flock numbers up. After the Cornish and the Leghorns reach a year of age, they just become too temperamental and sickly to bother with anymore. Feed is also an issue. With all of the health problems they start to develop, it becomes necessary to add antibiotics and specialized grain to keep them laying and healthy. Suddenly, chickens aren't the easy beginner livestock to keep anymore. Instead, we'd advise the Freedom Rangers, Plymouths, and the Sussex. There's a ton more great ones, but we would be here a while listing them all. Feel free to comment your favorite below. They are all much more relaxed, friendly, and all of them are very productive layers. Yes, they grow out a little slower, but it's only by a few months, so you're not losing too much time. They all fare well in cold, heat, and everything in between. The Freedom Rangers and the Plymouths are especially good foragers and make for some of the best mixed flock free-range chickens you can ask for. Freedom Rangers are particularly popular on regenerative farms. And to bring this home even more, all three produce a higher quality carcass, and they're exponentially healthier and more long-lived. Even if you let them run an extra year or two after they've reached maturity, it won't affect the quality of the meat at all. We nearly added the Bantam breeds and the Rhode Island Reds to the list too, but Rhodies are a little temperature sensitive. The Bantam breeds are probably some of the healthiest and best foraging chickens you can ask for, but they don't quite lay as many eggs and their carcasses are smaller and more lean than the rest. So if you're not worried about keeping up with sales, have a look at those breeds too. Now for goats. And are there ever really any easy breeds when it comes to the goats? Probably not. Don't get us wrong, we adore the ultra-productive, completely insane little goats, but since they have no respect for your fences, your garden, or anything else, they can be a bit much to handle. Here, the deception lies with the fact that people call some breeds easy. Don't be fooled. Any breed of goat is going to be more difficult to care for than other livestock. They just don't want to be penned. Goats need room to explore, breed, eat, and frolic to their heart's content. Pen them up and they become violent little delinquents hell-bent on ramming their way out of their enclosures. Usually, the Nubian and the Saanens are advised as the more chilled-out breeds with high milk production. And yes, they are more relaxed than, say, the explorative and destructive Boer goats, but not by nearly as much as they're being advertised to be. Nubians can be as loud and just as temperamental as any other goat. Saanens are a little quieter, but they require an enormous amount of feed to keep up with that excessive amount of milk that they're producing. And since we're on the subject of milk production, all that milk makes for much more specific planning. You can't risk missing a milking at all. If they're left for a little too long, mastitis can set in, and that's a recipe for a bunch of dead goats in no time. Sannons are for commercial farming, where there are many hands available at all times to keep their udders light enough and to schedule breeding and lactation times down to the day. The expense and labor outweighs the Sannons' docile natures. But if you're up for the challenge, go for it. Personally, we like the Alpines, Kikos, La Mancha, and the Pygmy and miniature breeds. Alpines and Kiko goats all come with plenty of high butterfat milk, and they're super adaptable to any climate. They aren't exactly mute, but they don't make nearly as much of a ruckus as the others, and they're very sociable with humans and each other. Because they are from the mountains of New Zealand, they are going to be a tough breed, but with that they want the space to express their goatness. We particularly love them for their parasite resistance. The La Mancha will give you a few more years of production than most breeds since they're so healthy and adaptable. Their milk is of a fantastic quality, and the meat is on the average side, so there's a lot of room to play with by keeping them. The Nigerian dwarf and pygmy goats are usually placed on the hobby farming side of things, but we believe that they're a much more valuable production animal than most. Both are hardy, healthy, adaptable, and capable of being penned. For their size, they give off a good amount of high butterfat milk and a stellar carcass. They're playful, if maybe a little noisy, and they're the only option available for those who have an acre or less to work with. These little guys tend to be a favorite amongst hobby farmers. Sheep are a different kind of conversation. Almost all of the breeds are pretty chilled out and relatively easy to care for. Unless you're going for a very ancient and wilder breed, like the Scudda or the Jacobs that are very volatile, you really don't have to overthink your selection too much. A sheep's feed requirements aren't that much different from goats, and they'll feed themselves with very little if they have enough room to graze. The main point of contention is when it comes to wool. Quite frankly, if you don't already have a market for the wool, or a definite place to sell it to, it's not going to be worth your while to rear them for wool production. With the introduction of synthetic materials, there just isn't much room for wool outside of industrial sales. The Rambouillet and Merinos are by far the most versatile, adaptable, and healthy wool breeds to go for. But if you can't sell the wool, you still need to shear them at least once a year, only for those mounds of wool to be wasted, and a great deal of cost to shave them down besides. Keeping hair sheep just for meat production is by far more profitable and less maintenance and cost. There is never a shortage of interested buyers for mutton, and you're not limited to timing to slaughter your animals. Dorpers, Barbados Blackbelly, and Katahdin are the most adaptable and cost-effective sheep to go for. They can forage on just about any patch you give them, and they'll do fine in high heat to cool climates. If you're in a very cold, deep snow kind of place, then the St. Croix might be better suited to deal with the icy conditions. None of these breeds need to be sheared, they grow out fast, and all of them have a good high-quality mutton at the end of the day. We will also add that some of these breeds can be more parasite-resistant than others. Parasites are the enemy of sheep, but a good line of heritage breeds like the Dorper and Barbados Blackbelly can naturally have a layer of genetic protection against parasites. As breeders, how often they are deworming and deaths in their herd before you buy. The hogs and chickens are the most commercially farmed species of livestock on the planet. Landrace and Yorkshire pigs are the fastest growing and most popular breeds at this time. Both breeds reach maturity at 6 months of age, and if we learned anything from the chickens, then you'll know that fast maturing rate just spells out health problems. The Landrace and Yorkshire don't just grow faster than is natural, they also put on an enormous amount of weight, more than their skeletal structures can handle. Letting either one live for longer than 2 years is going to lead to a hog that's in absolute agony because their joints are being ground down to dust, trying to hold those massive bodies up. Their immune systems are shot from the get-go, and you can expect respiratory problems, parasitic infections, and fungal sensitivities, not to mention being prone to sunburn. They've also been bred to have huge litters. Unfortunately, the sows, with immune systems that aren't the best to begin with, just can't handle this massive amount of output. She'll give birth to 2 litters, and then her body just won't be able to keep up with demand anymore. It's not even like the huge litters of piglets are always worth it. They're prone to genetic defects, and stillbirths and lameness are very common. Even if you put the health issues aside, there's still the sheer amount of scheduling to keep in mind too. If you're keeping either of these breeds, then you need to slaughter them at very well-timed intervals to avoid dealing with all of the health issues that come with age. Most of us are small-scale farmers, and we just don't have the amount of hands needed to keep up with that amount of constant production. Tamworths, Idaho pasture pigs, and Durocs are all easier to manage. Tamworth and the IPPs are good pasture pigs that require less grain than other breeds to keep them well-fed and gaining weight as they should. Durocs are a little more conventional, living off what you'd expect from a hog, grain, and corn-based feed, with minimal, if any, forage. But they all give you more time to play with before slaughter. Letting them grow out for a year or two isn't going to stress their bones or lead to any other health-related issues. Tamworth and IPPs have smaller litters, ranging between 5 and 10 piglets per farrow. And the Durocs push that number up to 15 for a single birth. So Durocs are the closest thing to a commercial production pig that you're going to get, without the huge concern on the health front and the race to keep up with optimal production. Personally, though, we prefer the IPPs and the Tamworths. They're cheaper to keep in the long run because they require less grain input if they're allowed to forage, and the litter sizes are just more manageable for you and for the sow that needs to birth them. She can have babies for much longer without being overbred and exhausted. I will make a quick side note here that if you are open to a lard pig, we love the Maishon. They have huge litters from 8 to 30 plus. They do well on pasture, and while the grow out is longer like most heritage pigs, it's worth it for some farmers for the huge litters and hardiness of the breed. And now for the big guns, the cattle. Currently, the Angus, Hereford, and Holsteins are the most commonly farmed cattle in the U.S. The Holsteins take the lead because of their excellent milk production, and the Angus is popular because of its high-quality meat and huge carcass size. There aren't a lot of drawbacks for any of these breeds. They're pretty healthy, have good birthing rates, and they can all feed themselves very well if left to their own devices. The reason we say that they're overrated is because they're so incredibly large. And let's face it, most of us don't have the space or the capital to supply such a huge animal with enough food to keep them going. It's an enormous investment to keep them, and that's just the additional feed, never mind the infrastructure or the veterinary costs that come with keeping cattle. Instead, we'd go for the Dexters and the Jerseys. Really, we love so many of the heritage cattle breeds, but again, we would be here all day. Dexter cattle are some of the smallest breeds you can ask for, but don't think you're getting a miniature. You're still working with half a ton's worth of beef for your average adult bull. Dexters can forage for their own feed, no matter how dry or wet the season is. Really, these babies were made to make the absolute best of their surroundings. Besides shelter to go to at night, they don't require much else from you. Cold, hot, and everything in between, Dexters are happy no matter where they're put. They aren't exactly an optimal milking breed, but they definitely have enough milk for the household. If you want the cow for the milk specifically, then get a Jersey. She'll give you all the milk you need for the home and for sales, and they're one of the most docile cattle breeds out there. 1,800 pounds for an adult bull is nothing to scoff at, so you'll get more than enough out of a carcass for the best feed conversion efficiency of most of the cattle breeds. In our opinion, the Dexters and Jerseys don't get nearly enough praise. They really are very efficient, no-hassle cattle to keep, and are all around well-tempered and very healthy. Don't let the factory breeds take all the glory. Their breedings forced them to live short lives, meant for a quick turnaround. And as profitable as that might sound, the sheer amount of veterinary bills, antibiotics, and additional care required to keep them alive just isn't worth it. But what about your experiences? What have the chickens, goats, and sheep that you've kept taught you? Tell us all about it, the successes and the failures. It's the feedback from you guys at home that keep this community together. So chip in and give us your opinions. We'll see you next week. Cheers!